I actually wanted to set the scene because we have a number of people here that are quite new to India and are looking at India with a new set of eyes. So I wanted to set the scene for Ambassador Wadhwa. And yes, I encourage you to eat as well. So please carry on. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're gathered and pay my respects to the elders past and present. And I also acknowledge the presence of the dignitaries here, and particularly Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Thank you, Ambassador, for making the time to come and speak to us. Mr. Manish Gupta, the Consul General of India, the Honourable Andrew Robb, the former Australian Minister for Trade, Mr. Julian Leeser, MP, and Julian is the Chairman of the Parliamentary Friends of India. Dr. Hari Harinath, OAM, Chairman of Multicultural New South Wales, Ms. Trudy Whitbrook, the Director for DFAT, and obviously our guest and host today, Mr. Doug Ferguson, Chairman of KPMG New South Wales and the Chairman of Asia Society. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good morning. Newland Global Group is delighted to partner with the Consul General of Sydney and KPMG to present this exclusive boardroom briefing on the opportunities with New India with our distinguished guest, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Just wanted to set the scene for some of the people who are quite new here. And we'll talk a little bit about the past relationship between India and Australia, the present relationship, and a little bit about the economic strategy, which was written by commissioned by the Australian government, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Gupta. So, Australia and India can be best described as loaded in intent and limited in actions. It has been like a roller coaster ride over the last decade, where rhetoric and symbolism has defined the relationship more than substance and tangible outcomes. It is underappreciated and unnoticed that Perth and Chennai are closer to each other than Sydney is to Seoul, Beijing, Tokyo, South Korea, China, and Japan, which are top trading partners with India today. The present Australia-India relationships. Having said that, though, what we are witnessing today is a significant shift in strategic economic repositioning by Australia and India in terms of engaging with each other. In 2014, when Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited, after a gap of 28 years, visited Australia, in a speech to the joint sitting of Parliament in Canberra, PM Modi asserted that Australia was no longer at the periphery of India's vision, but at the centre of its thoughts. It is a sentiment that has been echoed by previous Australian Prime Ministers who visited India, Mr. Malcolm Turnbull, and of course by PM Scott Morrison, who is visiting India in January 2020. Hence, there is a conscious realisation within both countries today that the momentum is important to the relationship and the quality of the relationship, particularly where it's driven by synergies. Synergies such as English as the language of business, synergies such as the Westminster legal system, and synergies such as the living bridge we called the Indian diaspora, which is 700,000 strong in Australia. The India economic strategy, which was launched and established last year by the Australian government, is the IES 2035. This document, or this report, addresses the need to address the execution deficit of the relationship and limited understanding about India, led to an elaborate report commissioned by the Australian government, the India Economic Strategy. The strategy has set a target for India to become one of Australia's top 3 export markets, to make India the 3rd largest destination in Asia for Australian outward investments, and to bring India into the inner circle of Australia's strategic partnerships. The targets set in the IES 2035 are to make India a stronger economic partner, and this should be driven by specific actions, agenda, timelines across different sectors of engagement. This is pertinent as Australia is increasingly aware of its economic exposure and potential vulnerability to China and the need to diversify its risks. Adding to that, there is also a strong geopolitical component. Australia and India are situated in the most dynamic region of the Indo-Pacific, that is the centre of economic and strategic gravity today. The region has featured heavily in recent Australian strategic discourse, especially since the release of the 2013 Defence White Paper and the 2017 Foreign Policy White Paper, and the emergence of the Quad, a security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, US, to counter China's hegemony in the Indo-Pacific. So why India? India, over the last few years particularly, has had an explosive economic growth and has vaulted into the ranks of the world's emerging major powers. With major reforms on the ease of doing business, opening up of sectors for investments, shedding 1,500 plus archaic laws, digitization in administration, possible land and labour reforms in the months to come, India is poised to become the third largest economy in the world by 2030. The 3 Ds, democracy, demographics and demand, powered by digitization and decentralization, are unlocking the new market's potential. India today stands at the cusp of 3 vital transitions as it aims to transforming itself from an emerging to a developed market economy. These are rural to urban, farm to factory, and informal to formal. By 2025, 1/5 of the world's working age population will be Indian. By 2030, there will be over 850 million internet users in India. By 2035, India's 5 largest cities will have economies comparable to the size of middle-income countries today. India's biggest cities are increasing at about 12% a year. Emerging cities will see the highest growth in the number of elite and affluent households through to 2025. A rising aspirational new India demands modern-day goods and services in education, agriculture, energy, resources, healthcare, FMCG, financial services, infrastructure, science and innovation. India's economic growth, its appetite for resources, energy demand, skills development, technical know-how and investment has made it a market full of potential and opportunities. There is no market over the next 20 years which offers more growth opportunities for business than India. Reform, perform, transform is driving India's agenda. So, onto the Australian economic strategy. The important sectors, opportunities and concerns between Australia and India to take this relationship to the next level also led to the Indian government's commissioning of a reciprocal report to the IES 2035, which has been called the Australia Economic Strategy, chaired by our chief guest today, Mr. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. It is our privilege to know more about the report from him today. It is interesting that this type of a blueprint to enhance trade opportunities between India and other countries has never been attempted before. The release of the India Economic Strategy to 2035 last year and the Australian Economic Strategy is a way forward towards building a stronger knowledge resource that could enhance our understanding of each other across different sectors, help businesses strategize, explore and expand in the Indian or the Australian markets with ease. It will give further impetus to the need for creating an Australian imagination in India and an Indian imagination in Australia. I've recently completed my book, which is for foreign investors who are interested in doing business in India. The book, which is titled Simplifying Doing Business in India, is a step-by-step guide, a practical guide on doing business in India, the sort of opportunities New India has to offer. Whilst writing this book, the months of rigorous research, I came across several authors who have written extensively on the Indian market scenario. I wish to quote a prominent author, Rama Bichupukar, on her book, We Are Like That Only. She writes, India is a kaleidoscope. Every time you turn it, you get a different perspective, enticing, different, and real. It is important to know that Indian consumers are value conscious. They may be poor, but they are not backward. The prize can be very substantial for anyone who understands the Indian market. India is an investment opportunity. Think like a venture capitalist. Invest in innovation. It is the interplay between micro and macro approach that defines the overall Indian market. Businesses must replace models of monolithic middle class with a multi-layered model of people. There is no single India. They are the very rich. There are the IT pharma employees who aspire to global standards and have high expectations. There is the aspirational middle class, the self-employed India, the agricultural, independent, subsistent farmers, the urban poor, the rural poor. They all have different approaches to consumption. They all construct their consumption basket in different ways. Hence, organizations are better off in creating their own India that they want to serve. On that note, both governments today have done their bit. It is important now today for businesses to take charge and to take forward this important relationship between Australia and India. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Mr. Manish Gupta, who's the Consul General of India to Sydney, to share his views with us on New India growth opportunities. Mr. Gupta is a career diplomat and a member of the Indian Foreign Services since 1998. In the course of a diplomatic career spanning over 20 years, he has held various positions in New Delhi and abroad. He has extensive experience in dealing with multilateral issues. Prior to assuming his current responsibilities, he served in the Ministry of External Affairs as Joint Secretary for Overseas Indian Affairs. Earlier, he served as Consul General of India in Istanbul, Turkey, and in the permanent mission of India to the United Nations in New York. Welcome, Mr. Gupta.